1 minute. I'd like to call the September 28th, 2022 MAG Regional Council to order. For those around the table, please turn on your microphones when speaking so that those joining virtually can hear you. I know that's an issue sometimes. For those participating via Zoom, please remember to unmute your device before speaking and mute when you are not speaking to create a positive experience for all the attendees. When speaking, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. Phone participants should use *6 to mute, unmute, and *9 to raise their hand. The MAG public comment process provides opportunities for members of the public to comment on items scheduled on today's agenda or on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction. 3 opportunities are provided for public comment, including call to the audience, the consent agenda, and action items to be heard. MAG also provides the opportunity for members of the public to submit written comments via the MAG website prior to the meeting, as long as the comments are received at least 1 hour prior to the posted start time for the meeting. If you'd like to comment on today's meeting, please fill out a white request to speak card located on the information table in the hallway. Please be sure to indicate the item for which you want to speak and give it to a designated MAG staff member. Don't forget, if you parked in the garage, which we almost, I think I'm looking around, we all do, please remember to validate your ticket. Parking validators are available on the information table in the hallway. For those of you who purchased a transit ticket to come here, like Mayor Osborne, all the way from Buckeye, please see staff for a ticket. Please note that hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. We'll now begin the meeting with roll call. Andrea?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Regional Council. I will go down the list of members alphabetically. Please unmute and indicate if you are present. Mayor B.N. Wilner. Vice Mayor Jeff Brown.
Present.
Thank you. President Burnett. Mayor Carlotte. Ms. Daniels. Mayor Dickey.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Gallego.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Giles.
Here.
Thank you. Supervisor Goodman. Mayor Hall.
I'm here.
Thank you. Mayor Hartke.
Here.
Thank you. President Javier. Mayor Hermosillo.
Here.
Thank you. Supervisor Hickman. Mayor Lavalde.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Governor Roe Lewis. Mr. Meck. Mayor Molina.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Osborne.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Ortega.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Pereira.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Bridget Peterson.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Les Peterson.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Pizzillo.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Riggs. Mayor Rodriguez.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Schoaf. Vice Mayor David Smith.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Nancy Smith.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Walter. Mayor Wires.
I'm here.
Thank you. Chair Weiss.
I'm here.
Thank you. Mayor Wilson.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Woods.
Here.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed? Mr.
This is
Chair.
Mayor Schoaf. I'm not sure if you got me or not.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Mayor Schoaf. And Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Andrea. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence? The Pledge of Allegiance is led by Mayor Nancy Smith.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our next item is item number 3, call to the audience. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. I have received one card, Ms. Barker.
Okay, there. I did it. Yes. Okay, good afternoon. Our Mayor Chairman, Kenneth Weiss, and mayors. My name's Diane Barker. Come on down, the price is right. I live downtown Phoenix, and that's what our now Congressman Greg Stanton used to say if I was going to speak at City Council. And so today I did receive my bus card. Remember, you have and used to announce that if you did come by bus instead of car, that we pay for your parking and pay for your lunch and pay for your gas, and we pay and we pay and we pay. Know that you get a bus ticket. And so, I will use it. And I have been able to go through several cities on the weekends for that. This is my season for Ohio State football. I'm glad to see our mayor from Phoenix is wearing Ohio State collars today. I got to meet her lovely parents, and they were grads from University of Michigan. And so, that we hope we get a game. But anyway, by going, I go to these games and I go to at least like 4 spots that are sports bars by light rail and bus and a folding bicycle. So then I can see, basically is what going on, and I have a tendency to report back to the system. Hey, could you check? One thing that I was really interested in is bus pull-ins, and they're expensive and they need to be used properly. And having been trained as a bus driver, so I know a little bit about that. But I just like to say that when you build infrastructure, and I know that you have a standards committee with the MEG and your technical people from the cities come here, that in fact you've tested out those structures such as bus pull-ins. So now that we have bus racks, when they pull up, that you're not like what happened to me. I'm pulling the bike off in gravel and cactus, a real thorny one near me, So then I let the next driver know that when I got off, if they could make sure that they pulled off by the concrete platform. So anyway, I'm just here to see that. I'm really against the litter, and I will clean up bus stops when I'm there because, it's a little exercise, and I notice nobody is throwing down when I am. I'm here to encourage you to enlist the help of the citizenry in keeping our city safe.
Thank you, Ms. Barker. Go Buckeyes.
Oh,
Sorry, Mayor. Your city is named after the Buckeyes, and you're saying what?
You didn't say Buckeye.
I said Buckeyes. No, we're not rooting for the city of Buckeye today. We'll do that later on. If you wonder what we're like outside of the meeting, feel free to hang around with us. Item number 4 is the executive director's report. Amy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for this opportunity to provide updates on a few items of interest. So first off, we'd like to share with you that the Secretary of Economy for the state of Sonora had come to visit us recently, as well as the state of Sonora representative here in Arizona, David Figueroa. They've been great partners in terms of their collaboration with MAG. They recently visited our offices and participated in a tour of the state of Sonoran representation office at the Arizona State Capitol. And they continue to work with us on projects like Arizona, and we appreciate all of their collaboration. Next slide, please. Speaking of Arizona, we want to thank all of you who came out. We had probably about 120 people in a room. It was very tight, standing room only. We had our 9th meeting at the recent League of Arizona Cities and Towns Conference. That event went extremely well. It gave us a great opportunity to meet the newly elected officials from the state of Sonora and to discuss our shared infrastructure and ports of entry. We would particularly like to thank Mayor Hermosillo for being the master of ceremonies for us, and to thank Mayor Wires and Mayor Gallego for speaking at the event. I know a number of you attended as well, and we do appreciate your participation at that. Also, Councilmember Ray Melnar participated on the binational panel of elected officials, along with mayors from looks like Guaymas and Oro Valley here in Arizona. Also, thanks to ADOT for their participation. The next meeting is scheduled for August of 2023 at the next League of Arizona Cities and Towns Conference. Next slide, please. Speaking of the league, again, thank you so much for all of the attendance. This was another standing room only event. Thank you to Mayor Hartke for your leadership in pulling this important session together. And also, we would like to recognize former Mayor Price for his participation on the panel as well. Our MAG staff, John Bullen, presented on the panel about the impact of the governor's veto and to our enabling legislation to continue that half-cent sales tax here in Maricopa County. The panel in particular demonstrated that this impacts not just Maricopa County, but it really has a devastating impact statewide. And so that message was carried through in a very strong way and has been carried forth beyond that meeting. So it's an important thing to communicate. Again, that standing room only really demonstrates high levels of interest and support in this critical issue, not just for our region, but for the entire state of Arizona. We would like to thank the League for accommodating this important session. Next slide, please. Continuing on with the theme of conferences, the Age Friendly Arizona Conference was held just last week. We had 350 people registered for that event. Want to thank Mayor Weiss and Mayor Gallego for speaking at the event. You'll also see Glendale's Dementia Friendly team pictured in that in the middle and the top line there. We had great representation from throughout this region as well as from throughout the entire state. We had a national speaker come in, Zachary Benedict. He's nationally known for his work as an architect with age-friendly communities. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the event, including AARP Arizona, Scan Desert Health Plan, Vilas Health Foundation, the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, and the Veterans Donation Fund of the Arizona Department of Veterans Services. All of the conference materials, including a link to the recording of the plenary sessions, as well as the PowerPoint from each of the workshops, can be accessed on agefriendlyarizona.org. We encourage you to go ahead and take a look at that. This was a big lift and a big team effort from throughout the state, but also particularly for our teams here at MAG. We had multiple teams helping us out with this, and I'd like to recognize MAG staff for all of their assistance and for their support. This does conclude my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions or comments that you might have after the meeting or at any time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Amy. Is there any members who have a question for Amy or comment? Okay, if you do, get with Amy or Eric after the meeting then. Our next item is 5, is the approval of the consent agenda. Items 5A through 5M are on the consent agenda. Does any member of the committee have any questions or request a presentation on any of these items? As always, prior to the consent agenda, we do open it up to members of the public who'd like to speak on this item. Ms. Barker, did you want to speak on this item?
Thank you again, Chairman. On 5B and 5F specifically, but all through the consent agenda, we're talking about technical and policy guidelines with MAG, and both of them refer to this federal government. 5B is conformity air quality, and 5F is environmental justice. So as a citizen, I come before you to say that I am supporting both of these because it is important and that we have a heads up for what's going to be coming in a few months. This place is going to be packed with people. And there are things that I believe that our cities are done. I've had some discussions, I know, with the city of Phoenix and like this. And I'm talking about just regular things. When I walk several blocks in an urban area and I have picked up some litter, you know, I have my little glove on and I can't find a trash can. I think most people will put things in a trash can. Our trash around is by derelict of duty of a citizen or a person, not a citizen, or it's flown off of a truck where they were supposed to secure it. So what I'm just saying is let's get a reminder, a heads up of what's happening when we get more people in this area. We want them to come and enjoy our environment. And that's another thing. In all of these procurement codes, the county said, when I brought this up, their procurement department, hey, that's a good idea. I'm surprised it wasn't done. Maybe some of your cities are doing this where you put a boilerplate in your procurement costs that talks about the conditions of the Sonoran Desert and in the products and services that you are procuring as our government, that these vendors understand Arizona. They specifically understand our valley. They understand the sun, that their products will deal with the chemistry here. And it is important we have a live situation. For example, on the light rail where the fare boxes aren't working and the sun blinds them and they're getting broken down by the, and the canisters, if they come up with cold water, they're hot to touch your arm. So I think you get the gist of it. And I thank you for your time. Please remember they're human beings and more of us that are coming here soon.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Andrea, do we have any other speakers for the consent agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've not received any written comments for this item or any item on.
Thank you, ma'am. That being said, can I get a motion on the consent agenda?
So move. Second.
I have a motion from Mayor Harkey. Who was the second? Thank you. Mayor Ortega? I just couldn't see. Any further discussion? Please do a voice vote, a roll call.
Mr. Chair, would you like to do a voice vote in the room first?
Yep. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will now go through the roll call of members participating virtually. Please unmute and indicate how you vote. Mayor Dickey.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Hall.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Hermosillo.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor LaVault.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Molina.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Pereira.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Bridget Peterson.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Schoaf.
Yes.
Thank you. Vice Mayor David Smith.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Wilson.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Woods.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there anyone virtually that I missed?
This is Mayor Rodriguez. I vote aye.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, everyone, for that. Item number 6 is the third project deferral request to City of Tempe, Rural Road to McClintock. This will be presented by MAG Transportation Improvement Program Supervisor Patrick Stone and guest speaker Chase Woolman from the City of Tempe.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of Regional Council. Pleasure to be here to present this item. Excuse me. Before I turn this over to Mr. Wallman from the City of Tempe, I want to take a moment to explain the deferral process and the importance of the deferral process. Deferrals are covered in the federal fund programming guidelines that MAG adheres to. It requires that an agency that's requesting a second deferral or additional deferral demonstrates what has caused the deferral, what the agency is doing to deal with the deferral, and then also the agency's commitment to the project. In addition, deferrals have an impact on federal funding in the region. For those that don't know, we operate on a use or lose basis. So any federal funding not used by the end of a federal fiscal year would be returned to ADOT. We are not going to return any funding to ADOT. So if we have a deferral, we have to find a way to reprogram those dollars. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Chase Wallman, Senior Transportation Planner with the City of Tempe.
Thank you, Patrick. Mr. Chair, members of MAG Regional Council, my name is Chase Wallman, Senior Transportation Planner with the City of Tempe. And thanks for the opportunity today to present Tempe's third deferral request of the 8th Street Streetscape and Multi-Use Path Project. Next slide, please. Just get everyone oriented of where this project is within the region. The project's located in Tempe, just south of University Drive along 8th Street, between Rural Road and McClintock Drive. The project's located just across the street from ASU's main campus, as well as the University and Rural Light Rail Station. In addition, in the project area, there's numerous historically significant sites, which I'll detail in another slide, but primarily you have denser multifamily residential along the project corridor. You also have Creamery Park and one of the highest transit ridership locations for the city's free neighborhood circulator orbit routes. In addition to that, the project also makes up part of Tempe's Bankhead Bike Boulevard system. So this project will make up part of the east-west running bike boulevard named the Sprocket Route. And then in addition, in the future, it will be intersected by another bike boulevard route along Dorsey Lane called the Chain Route. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing a project summary of the improvements that we're proposing with this project. It'll include 1 mile streetscape improvements, as well as an additional half-mile off-street multi-use path. Some of those improvements will include ADA accessibility improvements, such as directional ramps. You'll have some street improvements, such as high visibility crosswalks or bike lanes, and traffic calming. And then for the off-street pathway, we are proposing a 10-foot wide concrete multi-use path with lighting, landscaping, and public art. Next slide, please. So this project's not only significant for the city of Tempe, but it's also significant for the region as a whole. This photo on the left is showing one of the first highway systems in the country, the Bankhead highway system, which took users from DC to San Diego along the stretch of 8th Street. In this photo that you see on the left, on the top left, you see a large building. This building is where present day Four Peaks Brewery is. This is a historic ice factory and creamery in the 1890s. The White House with the teal below, that is one of the oldest adobe structures still remaining in the region today. That's the Elias Rodriguez House. And then finally on the bottom right, you see a ditch. That's a Kirkland McKinney ditch. That was one of the first waterways to supply water to the then settlement of Tempe, as well as a nearby Hayden flour mill. Next slide, please. So to give you a background on the project timeline, this project was initially programmed for construction in 2017. So with that, the city started the design process in 2014 with our preliminary design and our public outreach. We got as far as the 95% final design plans in 2016. And this is when our original environmental consultant discovered part of what is known as Feature 7, which is a historic Hohokam architectural feature. So when part of this feature was discovered, the city sought additional consultation from FHWA, ADOT, and the 4 Southern tribes on a path forward for the archaeological work. It was there that it was recommended that the city retain a new environmental consultant, one that was more familiar with the Section 106 process, as well as pre-classic features and Hohokam features. So with that, we first deferred the project from 2017 to 2018. Once we had our new environmental consultant on board and they got in there, they determined that the archaeological work required for the project was severely underestimated by our original consultant. This would require not only a phase 1 data testing, which the city anticipated, but also a data recovery and analysis scope of the archaeological work and additional consultations. It was determined that this additional archaeological scope and consultations would push the project well beyond its first deferral timeline. So the city at the time deferred the project as far as we could, which was 2022. Since then, we made significant progress on this project. We finished all the archaeological data testing, recovery, and analysis, completed those consultations. And in this past December, we received approval on our remediation plan. This remediation plan is the plan that will allow the project to go forward from 95% to 100% and get the project ready to advertise for bids. As part of that remediation plan, the city will have to do ongoing monitoring in the construction area. We will have to avoid construction activity within the Feature 7 archaeological feature, as well as we will implement interpretive elements along the project corridor that will kind of tell the story of the history of 8th Street. Next slide, please. So this exhibit is showing just kind of the scope of the archaeological work. You see all these symbols in black. These are areas of trenching, as well as all the mortuary and non-mortuary features that had to be recovered on the site. And then you see this red outline. This is the Feature 7 that I'm talking about, the Hohokam architectural feature. Next slide, please. This is a picture of that feature 7. This is an aerial photo, and it really shows the scale of just how large this architectural feature is. You can see the nearby sidewalk to the south. So very, very extensive archaeological work had to take place for this feature. Next slide, please. Again, this is the same feature 7. This is looking east at just a perspective from the street. And this picture does a good job of actually showing the materiality of what this architectural feature was built out of. Next slide, please. And wanted to show this slide because it really shows the detail of just how extensive this archaeological work was. It went to the point of outlining footprints on the site. Next slide, please. To reiterate our requests, we are asking Regional Council to approve our third deferral request from FY22 to FY24. And this is because we've received approval on a remediation plan, which will allow the project to resume. We'll revise our design from 95% according to that remediation plan, get it to 100% and get it to a point where we can advertise for bids for construction. Next slide, please. As always, the city remains committed to this project. To date, the city has spent $1.5 million on associated archaeological work for this project. The city continues to program all required construction and design funding that's needed to close out this project, in addition to all the local matches that are required from the grant. And as always, project management staff will be assigned through the completion of the project. Next slide, please. So with that, our new project schedule, as I said, we received in 2022, December 2021, we received a remediation plan approval. So with that, if we are successful with our third deferral request, we will update our plans to reflect that remediation plan, and we anticipate submitting our final 100% plan specifications and estimates in early 2024 and obligate for construction in FY 2024. And with that, I thank you again for the opportunity to present our third deferral request, and happy to take any questions you may have.
Chase, can you go back? Could someone go back to the excavation site right there? I think reading this in the update gives us some idea, but seeing it here gives us some real update on this. Mayor Woods, did you have any comments on this?
Hi, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
No comments on mine at this point. Just still listening to the presentation, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any comments from the committee on this? Can I get a motion for approval?
So move. This is Mayor Molina from Guadalupe.
I have a motion from Mayor Peterson, a second from Mayor Molina. Everyone in the room, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Andrea, do you mind doing a roll call of the?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I'll go down the list of members participating virtually. Please unmute and indicate how you vote. Mayor Dickey.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Hall.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Hermosillo.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor LaVault.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Molina.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Pereira.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Bridget Peterson.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Schoaf.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you, Mayor Schoaf. Vice Mayor David Smith.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Wilson.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Woods.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed? Mr. Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just thank you. I appreciate it. Just wanted to say thank you for coming to me as well. Just wanted to tell everyone, I just really appreciate the support and consideration for the project. That project has really been a collaborative and engaged process. And I just want to thank the partners, including the Salt River Pima Maricopa community, our 4 Southern tribes, the state of Arizona, as well as federal entities and all the MAG staff for all the work they've done in this project. So I just wanted to make sure that I gave some of those acknowledgements before we moved on to the next item.
Thank you, Mayor Woods.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I interrupt for a moment?
Yes.
We have Mayor Rodriguez on virtually, and I'd like to ask his vote for item number 6.
Juan?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Item number 7 is a second project deferral request, Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation Dirt Roads Paving Project. This will also be presented by MAG Transportation Improvement Program Supervisor Patrick, and he will introduce our guest speaker, Mark Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of Regional Council. Again, I'm not going to reiterate what I just said for the Tempe project. It all applies here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Frank, Environmental Manager with the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation. Mr. Frank, he's presenting virtually.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the MAG Regional Council. The Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation is requesting your consideration on a deferral for the unpaved roads project here at Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation. Next slide, please. The project is 3 unpaved roads here at Fort McDowell. They are Uni Way, Sandtrap Road, and Goomer Road. The combined length of these 3 projects is about 3/4 of a mile. Next slide. The scope or the goal of the project is to, of course, reduce the long-term airborne dust here at Fort McDowell to conform with federal, state, and tribal efforts to improve overall air quality. We are focusing on paving these 3 unpaved roads and doing some drainage improvements and safety improvements, correcting right-of-way documents, which are kind of a combination of tribal and BIA, and we'd like to make them all BIA, and utilizing the approved federal funds for roadway improvements through the MAG grant to Fort McDowell for $892,831, and realign the project schedule for an early fiscal year 24 obligation. Next slide, please. The Fort McDowell commitment to improving air quality here at Fort McDowell, the dust emissions. We have a number of single-family residents that are located along these 3 unpaved roads. Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation has a disproportionate amount of folks with upper respiratory disease issues, and this project will go a long way in addressing that type of a problem. We'd like the roads to be all-weather roads. Currently, during periods of heavy rain, the roads are very difficult to traverse. This will allow vehicles, school buses, and users to traverse those roads all year long. And of course, the community is very behind the construction and completion of these 3 paved roads. Next slide, please. Currently, the construction documents are 85% complete. The current right-of-way reflects, as I mentioned, conflicting ownership between tribal and BIA, and those are being rectified to be BIA rights-of-way. The problem in terms of time that we've experienced, and the primary reason we're asking for the extension, a second extension, is issues created by the COVID pandemic. And I'm sure all of you have experienced the same type of thing with your staff, your contractors. We were out of the office for many months. Our contractors had people out of the office and sick, and just a whole host of COVID-related issues that we faced during that period. Currently, the project has had 2 different design firms and 3 different surveyors. What we would like to do, and what we're in the process of currently doing, is working with Wood Patel as our surveyor, and they're in the process of resurveying and recorrecting the right-of-ways to reflect BIA ownership or public ownership. The estimated completion is in the next 2 months. We are expecting BIA final approval on those documents in the spring of 2023. Update all final clearances in the summer of 2023, and procurement and construction of the 3 paved roads in fall of 2024. Next slide, please. You can go through the next few slides rather quickly. These are just schematics of Udi Way, Sand Trap, and Buma. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Here is a summary of the finances associated with the project. As you can see, road design, $98,000, funded by Fort McDowell. On the construction side, Fort McDowell contributed about $51,000, and the MAG grant contribution is $841,940 for a total project cost of $990,831. Next slide, please. So at this point, we are respectfully requesting a second 2-year deferral to the Fort McDowell Dirt Road project for the 3 roads that were identified and we're requesting your approval of that 2-year extension. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of Regional Council, that concludes the presentation, and we'd be happy to address any questions.
Are there any questions? Anybody online have questions?
No, Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the Regional Council second project deferral for the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation Dirt Roads project, which includes the posted items.
I'll second.
I have a motion from Mayor Ortega, a second from Mayor Smith. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Andrea?
I will do a roll call of the members participating virtually. Please unmute and indicate how you vote. Mayor Dickey?
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Hall?
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Hermosillo?
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Lavalde?
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Molina?
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Pereira?
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Bridget Peterson?
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Rodriguez?
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Schoaf? Vice Mayor David Smith?
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Wilson?
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Woods?
Aye.
Thank you. And I'll double check with Mayor Schoaf.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
And Andrea, Mayor Rodriguez was, I might have missed him. Mayor Rodriguez voted?
Yes, he did.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Here's your- Item number 8 is the presentation by MAG Environmental Director Tim Franquist on air quality and implications to transportation and economic development.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of Regional Council. I think the best way I can begin this conversation is to really be blunt and say that we got 2 major storms upon us. One storm you guys have been talking about extensively here, and that's the issues that come with Proposition 400, right? You've been talking extensively about the economic impacts, social impacts that go along with that, but there are actually some positive air quality impacts that go along with that, particularly as it relates to public transit and congestion mitigation projects.
Tim, would you just speak a little more into the microphone, just because people on Zoom might have a problem?
Absolutely. The other storm that we have has broke upon us, and that's the air quality challenge that we have with ozone. And that's an older problem. We've been dealing with that issue since about 2016. I think we've been having those discussions, but it's here today. So about 2 weeks ago, the EPA did deem our area moderate non-attainment for the ozone standard. And I'll certainly go into a bit of detail upon that, but the Proposition 400 and the air quality issue have now kind of combined to make this just a mega storm that we're going to talk about today. Next slide, please. So in just the way of background, we had this kind of brief update in June. MAG is uniquely posed as an MPO to have planning authority. What you can see here is that we are an urban area, and with that comes air quality challenges. So the map here that we're showing is the different pollutants and the different non-attainment areas. When we don't meet a federal health-based standard, it's deemed non-attainment, and we can see that for a few pollutants today. We're going to talk specifically about ozone. Next slide, please. These are the three pollutants. Again, just in the way of update, we are delegated for ozone, particulate matter, 10 and 2.5, and that's kind of smoke and dust, and then carbon monoxide. Next slide, please. The challenge that we're going to talk about today, though, is this moderate non-attainment setting. So we talked a little bit about trends last time. We'll talk a little bit more. The federal health-based standard we're talking about today is 70 parts per billion. From an air quality perspective, I can tell you this is a very, very stringent standard. This is a national standard, so we're not the only ones with this challenge in an urban area. We are unique, and we'll talk a little bit about how we are unique from a climate standpoint and from an economic standpoint. What you can see here in 2021 and 2022 is kind of a range of measured parts per billion. The reason we range that, if you remember from last time, we can exclude things like wildfire from the data sets from a planning perspective. That's that lower number, 75. We think it's about there again. But again, I think it's important to continue to reiterate that 80, 81 parts per billion. That's the air that we breathe. That's the air that we breathe as residents. So wildfires aside, that is both a public health challenge. And then again, we'll talk about the planning challenge that comes with that. Next slide, please. So where are we today? So with the new bump up, the more stringent standard to moderate, we will have to talk about new control measures. And I really want to ring this bell here because we haven't put in control measures in close to 20 years here in the region. So we have something in the neighborhood of 93 different control measures to control ozone on the books. They've been doing a fantastic job under older standards, but with this new, more stringent standard, we'll have to really be talking about new control measures. Like I said, there's 93 here today. I don't think we'll have to have 93 in the future. Regional Council will obviously have the ability to vote on those measures, but I just want to ring that bell. These are measures that would bring us into attainment, and so they're absolutely, absolutely critical. The other thing that we'll talk about today are ozone offsets. This is something that impacts business. This is not something that actually lowers emissions. So this is just something to protect your air quality when you're in a non-attainment setting. So we got these two different buckets that we'll be dealing with. Kind of a business aspect with these air quality permits, these offsets, and again, the control measures that we'll be bringing a control measure list to Regional Council. We'll articulate the amount of ozone reduction associated with those and the potential economic cost of implementing those. So you have a complete return on investment kind of view there. We'll also have to be looking at contingency measures. So there's milestones under the Clean Air Act. If we don't make, we'll have to implement these control measures. And then again, I think we talked about this a little bit last time. Under this new rule for the 2015 standard, if we can't demonstrate attainment with control measures in the non-attainment area here in the region, we have to start talking to the state about potential control measures outside this region. That spawns a much, much more complicated discussion. Who are those controls? A lot of the industry around the state are already heavily regulated. So we're starting to squeeze water from a rock here. Next slide, please. Next slide. So again, just in a way of updates, what causes ozone? So it's what's referred to as a secondary pollutant. Things don't emit ozone directly. Volatile organic compounds, and what we can see here is like coating manufacturers, painting manufacturers, again, wildfires, and plants. Plants are actually a big producer of what we call VOCs. Oxides of nitrogen is the other component of this. That's usually by a fossil fueled emitting source. That could be a stationary source, what we call a fixed source, or motor vehicles, which is the situation here in Phoenix. Here's the unique part of our situation. It takes sunlight for this reaction to occur. We have 330 days of sunlight in Phoenix. That's a wonderful thing in our region, but it's also a driver of ozone. So that's kind of one of the unique components that we have. So it's a great thing on one end, but it's a really tough thing on ozone production. Next slide, please. So again, I think we've seen this slide in my earlier update, so not much changed here. I think the piece that I would continue to highlight, I did put in the 1997 standard, the 2008 standard, the 2015 standard. I think you can see the trend here. EPA has the opportunity to look at these federal health-based standards every 5 years under the Clean Air Act. You can see it doesn't happen every 5 years, but it does happen around about every decade. Sometimes it does happen closer to the 5-year mark. That trend is to be more stringent over time. And what we've seen in the earlier map with the 2015 non-attainment area, that was an expansion of about 8% area from the 2008 standard. So we see these standards get more stringent. We saw our area grow, which is a good thing, but we also see these non-attainment areas expand with them. And so this is a challenge that we have here today. But again, I just think it's important to understand this is something we're going to be chasing probably for some time. Again, I think we talked again last time about what this little tail means. The blue is what we discussed earlier. This is the air we breathe. This includes the wildfires. The red you can see here is kind of where we're gauging if we remove those wildfires for planning purposes, where do we kind of land? So I think the last time I gave this presentation, we were a little more optimistic. We thought it'd be a little bit below the 75 parts per billion, but it looks like after conferring with EPA and some of our other partners in the area, we're looking to be somewhere around that 75 parts per billion in terms of where we at for planning purposes. Next slide, please. So again, is wildfire the whole story? And again, I think we started having this conversation. So what we'd expect here is these upper trends are the graphs associated with our urban areas. So these three top, and you can see they're actually going up. What we'd expect is to see all these lines going up if wildfire was the only story in our region. So what this tells us is wildfires are not the only thing driving increase to ozone in our area. We should be seeing this statewide or certainly in a region. And so something else is happening here. Next slide, please. Again, when we start to look at this on the two major metropolitan areas, again, we see trends that are kind of flattening or even going up. We wouldn't anticipate that. What you can see here on the bottom kind of shaded area is what a national trend is. Again, we should be going down over time. There's a lot of control measures out there that we put in place, that the federal government put in place. We can see on a national trend, it is going down overall. So again, something else is happening in our area. We're looking to investigate that. Part of that is we believe the wildfires, the VOCs that we talked about, hit the NOx from the vehicles in our area, and that unfortunately creates this ozone. So it does go together. We can exclude the wildfire data when we know it's that, but on other times it looks like we're just a growing area and we're having growing emissions associated with that. Next slide, please. So where does the ozone come from? I think this is a really, really important slide here. What you can see is that real dark blue is it's from somewhere else. That boundary condition actually stands for areas outside of the non-attainment area. That can be international, that could be from California, that could just be other parts of Arizona. The other challenging piece is to see that lighter blue, motor vehicles, fossil fuel vehicles, and it's not to pick on them, it's just a part of the puzzle here, is that they are the biggest contributor to ozone concentrations in the area. Now, the challenge there, and I think where the Prop 400 piece starts to come into, is the state of Arizona cannot regulate tailpipe emissions. Only the US government and California have that ability. And so when I talk about tailpipe emissions, unfortunately, that's off the table. So we really have to start looking at lowering vehicles miles traveled, lowering the single occupancy vehicle, getting folks on public transit, because from a local control standpoint, unfortunately, the state or the locals can't control tailpipe emissions. As you can see, it's the largest source category. The other thing I would point out is I think most people traditionally believe that our large stationary sources, the big stack sources, are the largest contributor to pollution in the area. And what you can almost not see is those don't show up anymore. And so since 1970, when the Clean Air Act came into being, it's done an excellent job of actually reducing emissions from those sources. So over time, those stationary sources have actually become a much smaller piece of the puzzle. Again, the unfortunate piece of that, the way the Clean Air Act works, and we'll talk a little bit more about what reasonable available control technology is, it's a requirement under this new standard, is that they aim at these stationary sources, but what we can see is there's less and less of those emission reductions associated with those. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Okay, again, we looked at this one last time, so I'll just reiterate, as we start at marginal, that's the lowest, and we get all the way to severe. Extreme is a classification only for California, so they are unique in their own right because they get their own classification. The things they are doing, you've read, are probably pretty extreme because they have some big challenges. And we can see they have attainment horizons of up to 20 years. So I'm sure a lot of folks read recently about the no fossil fuel vehicles sold in California by 2035. That was the California Air Resource Board that put that in, almost certainly for planning purposes, because these measures have to be federally enforceable. They have to be laws to take credit for it. So it's probably why CARB put that in place, was to get credit for this. But you can see they're taking some pretty extreme measures to bring their areas under control. Right now, we're at the moderate area. But I think, again, like we talked about last time, I think this is the real critical point. This break point between moderate and serious is very, very significant. So it jumps exponentially in the amount of regulations, the air quality permitting threshold. So I think really the mantra is avoid serious non-attainment at all costs. And again, we'll talk a bit more about the Prop 400, but every single emission reduction counts right now. And so the best analogy I think I have is when the cup spills over, even an eyedropper of water would continue to spill the cup over. And so again, there's no one measure that we can point to that says this is a silver bullet. If we do this, we're in attainment. So I don't want to oversell any one measure, but every single measure, like we talked about, there's 93 on the book today. Every single one of those measures add up to success over time. And so again, we just want to avoid this serious non-attainment. We'll talk a bit more about the business impacts here in a second. Next slide, please. Again, we did talk a little bit about international transport. That is a very real thing in our area. We are in international border state. So we do get emissions from outside the country. The EPA has made this very clear to us by sending us 2 disapprovals of this plan and the guidance document, which basically says that if your emissions locally are over what are internationally, please don't send one of these. We won't approve it. And so the bar is very, very high on this. Our human caused emissions are over international emissions here. Again, doesn't mean we can't do this. It just means the bar for doing one of these 179 or what they call but for, we would attain but for this standard is very, very complicated and very difficult. So again, it is a planning option. We will be exploring it. I just want to put that out there. It's EPA has already kind of signaled to us is the bar is high, almost impossible to jump over. Next slide, please. And I think we can go through a few animations here. So what are the timelines? And again, I think this is why this is absolutely critical that we begin to have this conversation now. And it's unfortunate that Prop 400 pops up at this time too, because again, those emission reductions, while not the silver bullet, are absolutely critical into helping us make this timeline. So again, you can see our timeline here is that we have to be in attainment with this current standard by 2024, which means we have to have working control measures in by around April or June and start to reduce those emissions over this next year. So it is here. What you can see here is that threshold. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about what that means from a serious non-attainment, but after that, the EPA would deem us serious non-attainment. And again, we'd have 3 years. And if we don't attain, at that point, we are truly looking at California level controls. Again, love California, don't want their emission controls here. They're extremely strict. They're extremely cost prohibitive to put in place. And so again, our mantra is avoid serious non-attainment at all cost, use every control measure available at our disposal that's reasonable. Again, those are those transportation measures that come with Prop 400, congestion mitigation, public transit are absolutely critical to this. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. So what we talked about a second ago is control measures that you will have a ability to vote on and adopt. Those measures reduce pollution and get us into attainment. If we do that within the next 2 years, this whole portion I'm going to talk about right now is moot. That's I say the best emission offset we can have on the books is the one we don't need. And so the good thing about what I'm talking about now is this is here. This is a program that is being currently implemented, but it can go away if we get into attainment. So I apologize about giving you a Clean Air Act permitting lesson right after lunch. Happy to talk with any of your staff in more detail as how this would impact your municipalities. But I think it's good for us to kind of go over in high level. So again, how does it start? We start with non-attainment, of course. We have 2 different options. If we have a new business moving into the area, a new major source. In the today, this is a very large source. This isn't an Intel size source, a utility size source, what they refer to as a 100-ton per year source, or a major modification to an existing source. We talked a lot about Intel in the newspapers, so we saw that. This kind of modification in the today would be an Intel size modification. So not small stuff. If they go through that though, they have to come up with something they call an emission offset. To offset their emissions by a ratio, and we'll talk about the ratio in just a second. 2 different ways they can do that. The Arizona Department of Environmental Quality has what they call an emissions bank. So if you go out of business, you do a new control strategy that reduces emission, you can actually bank those credits. One of these companies can go to that bank and purchase those. Other companies have those in-house. They make those changes in-house and they just keep them, as I say, in the sock drawer. But again, they can use what they call a private credit, but they would have to have these credits in place, have a permit before they actually can even begin operating. Next slide, please. So here's the threshold ratios. I think we've seen a version of this table before. So again, depending on what non-attainment level you are, it changes. So we're at moderate here today. So again, what we're still talking about are pretty large sources, utility level size sources, Intel expansion level sources, so $20 billion sources. But again, I think the red line really is telltale. This break point between moderate and serious, as you can see, half the threshold. And we'll talk a little bit about those impacts, but that is very significant in that most facilities are around 50 tons per year. Expansions are hitting about that 25 tons per year. So now we went from major large facilities to kind of the run-of-the-mill size facilities. Next slide, please. So let me give kind of an example here. So in the today, and this is a very real example, we read about this in 2021 with the Intel expansion. They were over 40 tons per year in the modification. They needed 204 tons of VOCs and about 190 tons of NOx. And when you ratio that out, because they have to offset what they're emitting plus some, we were up 235 tons of VOCs and 217 tons of NOx. I put this note up here because it can't be underemphasized. To get that expansion, to get EPA to work with Intel on this expansion, it required the state, it required the county, it required the EPA, and it required the White House. And it literally required the White House intervening to say, EPA, you've got to work with these locals on these emission controls. You have to get there. EPA doesn't really like the emission offsets. They don't like what they refer to as mobile offsets. So if you make a change in your fleet, you go from gas to electric. They don't like those types of offsets. Variety of reasons why not. It actually took the White House to get involved in this expansion. Most people don't have that kind of pull. Most people are not going to get the White House involved in these kinds of expansions. So it offers up a major challenge. The other piece I would say to this is Chairman Gates has already written a letter to the EPA, as has Senator Sinema and Kelly, also bringing up this issue of offsets. Maricopa County has a rule right now that would make this a little bit easier for facilities. That rule has been with the EPA for 18 months in 3 letters from pretty big hitting politicians, and it's been crickets. So it's been a challenge, again, working with the EPA. How do we get these offsets? Again, it's a challenge that we'll have to get through, but we've had a lot of people talking about this, and we're not getting a lot of EPA movement on it. Next slide, please. Again, what does that mean in terms of real world facilities today? So we talked a little bit about TCM, so Taiwanese chip manufacturer. They're currently permitted at what we call 90 ton threshold. They did that obviously to stay under that 100 ton threshold. They don't have to trip off the offsets. Now, one thing I think I would mention here is how does a company do that? Well, pollution reduction controls are one. Those are expensive. They usually require a team of people to do. What typically companies do is they actually reduce the hours of operation, the number of shifts they may run. It's not a great return on investment. It's typically a lot easier than have to put in and install pollution control devices. And so what does that mean? It means actually less people working. It means a lot less money in our economy. It means a lot less tax revenue, both at the local and state level. So when we talk about how these facilities permit themselves, I think there is that impact of there is a direct tax implication to when you see a 90 ton year producer, because they're likely dropping the number of shifts or the hours of operation. So we put TCM up here. You can see in the today that they are what they call a synthetic miner source. The data centers that we're starting to see come in the area, they're just over that 50 ton per year. So in the world of tomorrow, if we go into serious, TCM becomes a major source. These data centers become a major source. And also now we're looking for, you can see upwards of 108 tons of offsets. You can see the ratio with these data centers. I can't emphasize this enough. It is likely that these facilities don't come into the region today. It doesn't mean they don't come to Arizona. What it means is they'll probably locate outside the non-attainment area. But what we've talked about is the standards typically drop, our area expands, the non-attainment area expands. And so even these facilities today that may move outside the non-attainment area could be within the non-attainment area 5-10 years from now. And unfortunately be having this challenge. Next slide, please. And here's a hypothetical, again, in the world tomorrow at 25 ton per year. Again, this is not a gigantic change. This is something we want to see in the area. This is job growth. This is revenue production. This is tax money. You can see they would be looking for the offsets. Next slide, please. So where are the offsets and how many are out there? So in the today, we go to the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality's emission bank. What's listed is 309 tons of VOCs and 97 tons of NOx. Next slide, please. But here's what's available. Intel owns and used all those as part of the expansion. And so this is why this becomes a serious concern. Even 30 tons would be a problem. 108 tons is a very big problem. An Intel level expansion of 235 is a serious issue. The three together is next to impossible. So again, it's not a great story, but if we get our control measures in place, we reduce ozone in this next 2 years, all this is off the table. Offsets are no longer required. So again, Proposition 400, again, not a silver bullet, but public transportation drops emissions, congestion mitigation drops emissions. When we do that, we come into attainment, this stuff is off the table. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So again, I think it's really worth noting. I think when I saw this slide, when John Bowen was giving this, I think to you guys and again internally, my heart sank a little bit here. Obviously, there's a lot of air quality benefits associated with this, you can see in terms of money. But knowing that we were ultimately going to have to come in front of regional council and have a conversation about control measures, this was kind of going the other way. So we see, 367 miles of new freeways, HOV lanes. Every single one of these projects reduce either congestion, right? Slow cars are polluting cars. So we want cars to be going optimally speed. So if they're idling or slow, the pollution control, onboard pollution controls don't work as well. So each one of these projects actually offer us an air quality benefit. Not to mention all the other social and economic benefits that come with that. So that's why I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you today, because these two storms now are converging, impacting our economy, and we can solve them kind of together. Next slide, please. Again, this is the public transit that would be impacted. Proposition 400E doesn't go through. It's a substantial amount of public transportation. Again, not a silver bullet to our air quality issues, but absolutely a control measure that would help us going forward. So again, something I think is a concern that we really want to get that out to certainly the state and others that would want to listen. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is a study that the state did a few years ago, again, trying to get traction on how important of an issue this is. So this was a study scaled from a study done in San Antonio. This would be scaled to ours. And what you can see is we're here in moderate. This is an annual cost. And I can tell you this is a very, very conservative cost. This is derived out of what we talked about, businesses that may not come here, may not expand here, different tax revenue decreases. If we were to go to Sirius, you can see that doubles, and that's an annual cost. So this is not cheap to be in non-attainment for any of us. Like I say, this is a conservative estimate. Next slide, please. There's two more recent studies done out of Oklahoma City and one out of Corpus Christi. The number goes up substantially. It can be in the hundreds of millions. I think it's worthy to note that we have a larger economy in these two areas. And so we would suspect that the 100 to 200 million range is probably, like I said, a conservative estimate. So there is a very real cost to our area in a lot of different ways, but certainly a major economic cost as well. Next slide, please. So California obviously comes up a lot. So how is California doing this, and how are we different from them? Because we do have unique challenges. So in areas like Texas and California, and some of what we call the Rust Belt states, they do have a lot of heavy industry. Those industry come and go. As we talked about, when they go, you can actually bank those emissions. This happens so much in Texas and California. They actually expire these after 5 years, these emission offsets. So they have plenty to go around. We're not a heavy industry state, so we just don't generate the emission offsets like those states do. The other piece is California is a $3.4 trillion a year economy to our $411 billion, and this is a state economy. Obviously, they're the fifth biggest in the world. If they were their own country, they have the economy the size of Germany or India. They have 53 Fortune 500 companies there. We have 8. So I think it's fantastic for what we have here. I think we're doing a wonderful job. We're growing, we're expanding. But this is why California can get away with this. They have the money to do it. They have just an incredibly different industry and portfolio there. And again, just a much larger economy. And they have the emission offsets to do this. Next slide, please. So what does that really bring me to? I think it's, again, back to the kind of the two major storms that are breaking right now. Is air quality is important, obviously, for public health. It's important for our economy, important for the environment. Proposition 400, again, a lot of social benefits, a lot of economic benefits that go along with that. And there are air quality benefits that go along with that. So the two could be reinforcing, or the two can have the same challenge. So we do this right, we do this together, we can have good, responsible economic growth. So again, I think it's important to get the word out that every emission reduction counts, even the ones that are on the books today. And those are the ones that are associated with Proposition 400. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Tim, an incredibly thorough presentation. And it's kind of ironic. I'm doing for my degree, I'm actually doing, I just did a paper on the EPA and the Air Quality Act and all the impacts that it has on state and local government. So I may use this in a future thing, just so you know. Mayor Gallego.
Wonderful. Thank you. How timely that you are chair and in this program.
I haven't got my grade yet, so I don't know if it's good paper or bad paper. So.
Thank you again for the excellent presentation. This may end up being one of the most important items that we work on at the MAG level. If we have license plates restrictions based on the last number of your license plate, it's something all of our residents will know about and feel. The good news is we have abilities to do to take steps right now that will make this much easier. I think this room's pretty united in that moving forward on Prop 400 is essential for many, many reasons. You've made a good case. Human health is important. Ozone has real impacts both on our young people, vulnerable adults, and that is a good reason to do it. I think for some stakeholders, the economic development impacts are maybe what we need to lead with. You mentioned Phoenix and Chandler having 2 projects that would be impacted. Buckeye, Mesa, others have had great economic development successes that would also be significantly impacted by this. To me, this is a really strong motivation to make sure that transit stays as an important part of Prop 400. Prop 400 does, the extension does so many different things, but one of the important things it can do is to improve our air quality situation, or at least make it, the increases mitigated. And I think that's something we ought to lead with as members of this body. You talked about the impact on our power companies. If they need to make modifications to their power facilities, this is very important to it, but it should matter to anyone who uses electricity in our region. And so I think this really does give us a roadmap about stakeholders who we're all motivated to make sure that we have the best air we can possibly breathe and the most economic development opportunities. Many of us serve on different economic development organization boards or committees, and those meetings are going to be very different if we are in a different level of non-attainment. I think this month's news was bad news, but if we take it as a warning and we really invest in key areas, then it can end up being positive. And can you talk to us about some of the things, maybe electric vehicles and others that we might be able to do to help address this?
Chairman, members of the Regional Council, I think, again, EVs certainly play a part in this. Again, there's no silver bullet. We did the modeling. If you remove every single vehicle off the road in Maricopa County, we would reduce ozone concentrations by about 7 parts per billion. So we would just get in there. There's something in the neighborhood of 3.5 million vehicles. But again, the more EVs we can get off the road, that's again, something that helps us move the needle. Again, public transportation, certainly. We could be looking at different gasoline formations. That's certainly one thing. Cleaner fuels. Again, those require state statute changes. So again, not easy lifts, but things that we may have to do. We have talked about draconian measures of, do you start alternating vehicles? That's something I think you start looking at the severe level. So again, there's a lot of stuff on the table today. We'll be bringing you a list. We'll get a list sometime around November. I'll be able to give you a lot more data on what that looks like. We'll be getting that in front of you sometime in winter, but it really is a variety. The reason I'm kind of stumbling with a great answer is because we have the 93 measures in place today. We had to get a contractor on board to go dig out what are the other things. EVs obviously are a big portion of that, and love them or hate them. In terms of kind of helping us solve these air quality issues, they're definitely on the table.
Wonderful, thank you. And our team has reached out to the White House to talk about some of the issues in front of the EPA and if we might be able to move forward, some of which seem to me very consistent with the president's agenda, including greening mobile sources. So we will keep working in that area as well. But I think it is up to this body to act early because it will be much more expensive if we do not respond. One of the things we need to do is 400E with transit in it, but that it cannot be the only thing. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Couple questions, and one, just agree 100% with everything that Mayor Gallego had said. There is such an importance on getting Prop 400 extension across the finish line, and it deals with everything in what you were talking about today. So this is my second time going through this, and the first time, it's a lot of information you're throwing at us. So had a opportunity to think about that between last week's Transportation Policy Committee meeting and now, and then seeing it again. Just some real basic questions. What are the health effects we're talking about from ozone?
Chairman, members of the Regional Council, that's a fantastic question. That's why I think it's really important that we highlight that first. Ozone impacts your lungs. And so this standard is low enough now where this could actually impact somebody hiking, biking, just a normal person doing something with high respiration. And then, of course, it can impact vulnerable communities. So anybody that already has pre-existing COPD and has asthma, it can really, really impact those. So it typically impacts the lungs and breathing. If you ever have that feeling where you kind of see a smog and your eyes are burning a little bit and they start to water, or even that little burn in the back of your throat, that's actually ozone doing that. It's a heavy oxidizer. So again, if you're hiking, you're playing basketball, doing something where you're getting your respiration up, even a healthy adult can be impacted by ozone. And then again, obviously vulnerable communities, vulnerable individuals, the elderly, children. I often mention this, a child actually breathes as much as an adult does. They actually respire as much as we do. They just have littler bodies. And so that's why it's such an issue for children. And obviously with the elderly, they have sometimes compromised immune systems.
Okay, thank you. And then the history of those ozone levels, I think I'm understanding that was previously set at I guess the attainable level. I think I'm saying that correct. I think you know what I'm getting at 75, and then that has been reduced to 70. Has that consistently gone down over the last, say, 30 or 40 years?
Chairman, members of the Regional Council, again, great question. It has. And I think in the first presentation, we showed an at-large slide of just air pollution over time. And again, it's a remarkable story in America. Their population continues to grow, our economy continues to grow, and overall emission reductions do occur. I think what's odd about ozone, you saw those graphs earlier, something's going on with ozone that's a little different. So when we kind of amalgamate all those emissions together, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, at large, yes, we're getting much, much cleaner than we were in 1970. Something's happening in the last couple of years with ozone. You can see that also that little spike in that tail. Something else is going on there. That probably is the fact that we are growing. Vehicles are getting heavier. So that means they are a little less fuel efficient. So there's probably that in the mix. We are getting transport from outside this country. So EPA's modeled that. It's somewhere between 2 parts per billion from what they've looked at. The state just modeled that. There's somewhere about 4 parts per billion from their models. We've modeled and seen as high as 7. I think that's kind of anomalous. So I think probably 4 is probably about the right number. So part of that too is we have an international transport issue that's also going on. We just have this challenge with the EPA wanting to humor what they call the international transport or the but-for analysis.
Yeah. And at the same time, the standards have been getting more stringent from the government. Is that correct also?
Chairman, members of the Regional Council, that's correct. Yeah, you can kind of see over time. So the way the Clean Air Act works is every 5 years, EPA has to review a standard. And they're called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. They don't do it every 5. They look at it every 5 years. They don't necessarily drop it every 5 years. What you can see there is it was about a decade where they didn't drop it. And then they dropped it pretty quick from 2008 and again in 2015. And the trend is just that. It does seem to get more strict. Different science says, hey, these things are more dangerous to us. That's what it's based on, is the health impacts to society. And they tend to get more stringent. We see ours kind of going in more a linear fashion. Folks that were impacted by the lead NACs, that's dropped actually by an order of magnitude. So the trend is, yes, it drops. It can drop significantly. That drop from 75 parts per billion to 70 is actually quite significant. That 5 parts per billion is huge. Like I said, under other standards, it's order of magnitude, but that is the trend to get more stringent over time.
Okay. And then the last two, what the boundaries of the non-attainment, is that just Maricopa County?
Chairman, members of the Regional Council, it's outside that now a little bit into Pinell and a little bit up into Gila, just around, not quite to Roosevelt Lake. But again, you have to set, and unfortunately, I was the air director at the state to set these. You have to pick monitors that are non-attaining. So we were a little bit smaller footprint. The 2008, you can see, is a little bit smaller. It's not easy to see on that map, but there's a 2008 non-attainment boundary. 2015, it expanded by about 8%. And so now it comes a little bit into Pinell and a little bit into Gila County.
Okay. And then last one, I promise, that the pie chart with all the colors, the dark blue, can you explain that one more time? It's going to take me 3 times to get this. I've sat through this twice. But the as I understand it, that is ozone that's coming in outside of our area, not necessarily international, but from someplace else.
Chairman, members of Regional Council, that's absolutely correct. It's outside that non-attainment area boundary. So just that little piece up and now about half of Maricopa County, 'cause it's not quite the western portion. That's correct. It's outside that boundary area. And that can be, it can be from California. Sometimes winds change, we come from other states, it can be international. I think that's why I show that. That's the challenge is, again, we're doing a really good job of squeezing that pie, but the EPA will change that standard. And then we got to start working with a much smaller piece of that pie. Again, there's some possibilities to work with the state if those sources that are impacting us are in state. Obviously, if they're in California, there's other rules that cover that. It gets very complex when you start to deal with California. On the East Coast, they have something called the Ozone Transport Region. It's a whole area up and down the East Coast. They have to work together for downwind sources. It's not something we would want to see here, but I think a lot of us are getting more nervous that as this expands, these get more stringent. At which point do they start looking at Arizona and California for something similar where we have to start having that conversation with California saying, hey, you're impacting Arizona. And there's a planning process for that today. But again, as we start to see that pie get squeezed, we see those standards get more stringent. That's a conversation that's coming more into play, I think, today than it ever has.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Through the chair.
Mayor Harkey.
Yeah, I too, this is my second time seeing this, and I've had some questions from then. And, particularly with what Mayor Osborne just asked and Mayor Gallego, I mean, if we did everything, took every car off the street, stopped TSMC, stopped Intel, do all of that, we still have a significant problem from what you're saying that we can't control. If we're inheriting air from other places, as well as we certainly have similar with EPA particulate problems because we live in a desert, and every time we get a monsoon, Casa Grande comes and visits us here. It's at some point, is there any revelation in DC and EPA that says, look, this is the best Phoenix and Maricopa County is going to be able to do, or are we just held to a standard that ultimately, as they lower levels, is that it's impossible to get to, and so we're dinged and penalized. But if that doesn't help, is there? You mentioned a recourse of inherited on the East Coast. What's the possibility of us proceeding with those kind of directions? I mean, ultimately, if we do everything and we still can't change the dial, I don't think they expect us to eliminate every gas vehicle, to stop trucks from driving through this area, stop industry. So this is good information, but ultimately, apart from make us all nervous, is there some pathway beyond the things that we're doing and could do that still doesn't get us there? What are we left with?
Chairman, members of the Regional Council, I think that's a remarkable question. So when I was at the state, I inherited a lawsuit to actually sue on the 70 parts per billion for that exact reason. We understood the health impacts, like we talked about, but it seemed to be an unattainable standard. And this actually went all the way to the DC Circuit. And unfortunately, the judges there said, yep, Clean Air Act says nothing about difficulty of attaining. We talked with the EPA. We said, well, what doctor out there is ever going to say that more pollution is better for you? There's always going to be science out there that says likely this is worse for you. Are we just talking about a zero-sum game? If so, let's plan for that. Because again, I think we have these conversations every few years, just like this. We attain a standard, which we have. We've attained the 97 standard. We've attained the 2008 standard. We're kind of right back at it again. And again, we just want some planning horizon is what is that? Is that ultimately 60? And like you said, is that where we land? Because now we're at background level, nature's producing this. Is that where we're going? And unfortunately, we just never get those answers. And so the Clean Air Act doesn't say, ease of implementation is part of that. It's a health-based standard, which I think is a good thing. It protects our human health. So it's not a knock against the Clean Air Act, but it does pose a huge challenge. Is you're probably never going to go to a doctor and say, hey, if I breathe more of this pollutant, is that going to be okay for me? It's never going to be there. At the same time, from a planning perspective, is like we talked about, it's being spoke about right now at the EPA because they are reviewing this ozone standard again. It could potentially get more stringent. Is at 65. So then the whole state goes into non-attainment. And again, it's challenging because you can see these 3-year horizons. That for a business to implement that, for a municipality to make those kinds of changes, it's difficult. That's not a lot of time. And By the time you do that, boom, you're right back into the next stage again. So we've often described that as it does feel like you're chasing the tiger's tail, but unfortunately, there's no legal recourse for it, just the way the Clean Air Act has been written as a health-based standard. What I can say is that there are emission control projects that we will bring in front of you guys. So the good news here is we really haven't implemented new emission controls for 20 years. So there's still a lot of them out there. We're looking at the Great Lakes region that our contractor will get us a good list. We can't submit a plan that doesn't demonstrate attainment. So if we don't submit a plan, the federal government actually steps in. It's called a federal implementation plan. If we don't solve that issue, then we go into sanctions. We have to submit a plan that gets us there. And I'm confident that we will. So the goal isn't to scare you and say, hey, I don't know how we get there. The contractor we have right now have full confidence will find us control measures that get us there. I think what I'm trying to get across is we haven't done this in 20 years. These are new control measures. They are needed. They're not cheap to put in. We know that. They're not easy to implement. But again, we haven't done that in 20 years, which means there's an encyclopedia of things out there we can do. And that's what we'll bring forth to regional council, say, hey, these are out there. Here's the emission reduction associated with them. So again, today's not really a scare tactic, even though I know it is a bit scary. There are emission control measures out there that we will bring forward that can help solve this problem. Don't think it's 93 like we have in the books today, but it will be several.
Kevin, it's a great question. What is the appeal process to the EPA and where do the courts play a role in this? And the courts have been less than enthusiastic about overturning rulings from the EPA, especially on air quality. Mayor Smith?
So this is the first time through this presentation and actually my first conversation on ozone and parts per billion. So I'm learning a lot, but just because it's so much information, it well, specifically because the city of Maricopa is part of that small portion of Pinal County that probably is included in the regional area. So could you in 2 or 3 sentences tell me from all the data you presented where we came from, where we are, and where we're trying to get to, just to simplify my communications back? Thanks.
Chairman, members of the regional council, I'll shoot for 3.
Okay.
We were having challenges with the 2008 standard, so we were non-attainment for that standard. We recently attained that standard.
And that's the 70 parts per billion?
That's the 75 parts per billion.
75,
Yep.
thank you.
So we recently attained that, but at the same time, there's a 2015 standard, and that's the standard that we're talking about today in terms of non-attainment. So currently, we're moderate non-attainment for the 2015 ozone standard.
And that's the 70 parts per billion?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor Ortega and then Mayor Giles.
Thank you. Also, I noticed on your chart, the levels of the adjoining counties, in particular Gila County, were second to Maricopa. So on one hand, you could say, Big Brother in California is pushing air our way. Well, we're pushing it into Gila County, and that's not being a good neighbor either. So we have, co-responsibilities there. At one point, 50 years ago, the mining towns had fossil fuels to smelt, and then they converted it in the 70s to electric, and the skies cleared up over there, and they were cleaner, there than here. So I think as we look at this holistically, I'm agreeing with so much of what's been said, but I also want to point out that's pretty shocking when you look at that directly to the east of us. Thank you.
Mayor Giles?
This is my second time through, and I think we could do this every meeting probably and get something new out of it. Just a little bit of additional information that would help me. The slide that you showed that showed the economic costs to areas like I think Oklahoma City and another city was used as an example, and the catastrophic cost of non-attainment. How are those costs assessed? We're not paying penalties to the EPA, but I mean, who's writing the checks for those costs?
Tim, let's go back to that slide. If we can go back to that slide that showed, I think it was Texas A&M did the study right there. One more.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right there.
Chairman, members of Regional Council, that's exactly right. I think you see costs for and losses of. So things that we talked about is in their study, they lost some businesses coming in the area because of the offsets. For construction permits, it's just more expensive now to implement a construction permit because they have to go through that whole air quality process versus the easier process. So they have what they call a major source permit and a minor source permit. That minor source is much easier to obtain. That major source is going to require probably getting a consultant on board, doing a bunch of modeling. So I think that's what they're talking about there. Pollution controls, because you're getting more stringent. There's a list that Maricopa County is working on right now called reasonable available control technologies. It's a list that the EPA generates. If you have that source in the region, you have to implement X or have a different emission limit, which is going to require emission control. So it's kind of a spread out cost. It's going to be amalgamated based on businesses impacted, loss of potential business or expansion. So it's kind of a whole number. It's not a number that any one entity is necessarily going to be impacted, though I would argue in this case is a regional impact. And I think that's why both those studies actually come out of their local COGS or MPOs, because I think they saw that as a collective problem. And so no one MPO or city or business is going to incur obviously that entire cost. It's going to be shared. And so that's an amalgamated cost based on kind of what you can see here, cost for, losses of. But I have those studies I'm happy to share with folks much more in depth.
Thank you. Thank you. That's helpful. Again, a very compelling presentation. It's not often that the sky is literally falling, but this is one of those examples we'll look forward to. Of course, this adds an additional bullet point to, I think, the elevator speech that we give everybody about why Prop 400E is essential. But I'll look forward to additional presentations on this control measures planned. Thank you.
Well, Johnny, I think you hit on it. I think when we talk about Prop 400 and the economic development impact of the veto, we don't think of that economic loss, right? We think about the loss of jobs, but we don't think about the cost bringing the region into compliance. We don't think about the efforts that GPEC goes through when bringing companies in, and they say, okay, where are you at with the EPA and the clean air standard? And we have to dance around that or whatever we do. So I think that is something when we talk about our economic development presentation and a very an economic development discussion that goes along with air quality. Getting part of that, though, my question was on the CHIPS Act that has been highly touted. Senator Kelly was a big proponent of that. Or was there anything in the CHIPS Act that addressed air quality and these issues? Because for me, that's a conversation to have with not Mayor Kelly, Senator Kelly in the future, depending on what happens with the election, and say, listen, you've given us this opportunity for TSMC, you've given us this opportunity for Intel, you've given us this opportunity for LG and Core and whatever else may be happening in the Valley. But how do we mitigate the EPA? So kind of, can you touch on that a little bit?
Chairman, members of the Regional Council, I don't have the specifics on that, but I'm not aware of any waiver to the Clean Air Act or the permitting requirements. I just say, unfortunately, a lot of times the one hand doesn't know what the other is doing. And they just assume, hey, I got $20 billion. They can generate the offsets like Intel did. And so I don't know that they always contemplate the infrastructure and the permitting that often goes with that. So I can't speak specifically to that, but my gut feeling is that it's probably not considered in there. I would argue it is a national security issue and it probably should. But I think what the argument comes back, like when I sat in court and watched this, is the judge will always come back, well, the Clean Air Act is a health-based standard. We get the manufacturing need. And so unless there's a direct waiver, which I have a hard time believing there is, it probably is, hey, we want to invest, we want this infrastructure on chips, and you still got to get your air quality permit.
Tim, I'll tell you, this has probably been one of the best presentations and probably the best back and forth that we've had in a very long time. So thank you for that. And item number 9 is legislative update. Nathan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Regional Council. I'm going to be joined by John Bolin here in a moment, focusing our conversation today on veto impacts of our enabling legislation to continue the half-cent sales tax for transportation in Maricopa County. Obviously, our outreach on that continues, meeting with a number of business associations, chambers of commerce, directly with businesses. So those conversations are going, sharing those veto impacts. Of course, we've had a recent presentation and conversation about veto impacts as it relates to mobility. Today, we heard a presentation on air quality impacts. I'm going to turn it to John Bolin here in a moment to talk about the economic impact analysis. That was moved forward by the executive committee in the July, August timeframe. We're going to have results of that here in the upcoming October policy meeting timeframe. We'll talk about that. So that's 3 parts there: mobility, air quality, and economic impact. We're going to be working to distill this down into something that's messageable for you all. Your conversations with other businesses, leadership, be it in the legislature, governor's office, wherever you need to be. We're going to try to boil this down. Obviously, a lot of technical information, but trying to get it succinctly boiled down to something that you can deliver in your conversation. So that is forthcoming. I do want to pass along a note of thanks with conversations with stakeholders. Mayor Harkey, as was mentioned before, convened that panel at the league. So thank you for that. Supervisor Sellers spoke with the Rural Transportation Summit recently. So thank you for that. If there's somewhere that you need to be and you need help messaging in the meantime, please let us know. If there are stakeholders out there, businesses and others that you would like presentations delivered to, please let us know. If you have direct questions of MAG staff at any time, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be happy to sit down with you and walk through any information that you need. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll turn it over to John Bolin to give a little preview of the economic impact analysis coming in the October timeframe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the MAG Regional Council. I'll be brief with my remarks, cognizant of time. So immediately after the Regional Council Executive Committee approved funding for the economic impact analysis in early August, a team of folks have been working around the clock on that, both on the MAG side as well as consultant side. We have that analysis back, we have the results back, but in recognition that we need to push this out as quickly as possible, we will be starting to roll that out in the October committee cycles. So you will start hearing that as soon as October. As Nathan had mentioned, we're working on some of the messaging points. Suffice to say, we all know the impact that the extension has on the region's economy. Pleased to report that the numbers demonstrate that. We're talking billions of dollars for local jobs, economic competitiveness, creates new jobs, it creates quality jobs. So it checks off every box we want. So with that, we'll provide more in October, but we'd be happy to answer any questions.
For just FYI for the committee, Mayor Harkey, I know you presented it at the Chandler Chamber of Commerce last week or 2 weeks ago. I want to thank you for that. I know, was Chairman Sellers with you on that one, or?
Chairman Sellers, as well as Audra from here. So we had a triple punch, and it was well presented and well received.
Thank you. What I've asked with my conversations with MAG staff is that the message coming out of MAG is a cohesive message that MAG controls. And again, it looks like it's going to be a 3-part discussion on this. What I don't want to have happen is I don't want other organizations speaking for MAG. I want MAG to control that message. I want the mayors and the members to control those messages. And when they go out, we're all saying the same thing. And obviously we're tweaking it for different organizations, depending on that organization, but the message is cohesive. It's the same. And I think that's important. And I'm looking forward to October to kind of see where the information falls. Anyone else? Mayor Ortega?
Mr. Chairman, last meeting we discussed the outcome of the veto on transportation, the measure 400. And again, it's coming up repeatedly. I think as a group, again, a cohesive group, we looked at the possibility of a special session as a possibility at the time when certain action was taken. There's just we practically have a countdown on when that could occur. But I would say I'm certainly looking forward to that possibility. And I want to state that without leaving here today.
Mayor Ortega, I think we all feel the same way. And I know that staff feels the same way as we do about that. Anyone else? Anyone online? John, Nathan, anything else for you, Nathan? Okay. Just FYI, that the vacant seat today, the vacant seat left by Representative Espinoza was filled by Devin Del Palacio today. So he's an advocate for 400, and he'll be taking on that role for the next few months and possibly running for that seat in the future. So that's good news. Item number 10 is request for future agenda items. Anyone? 11 is comments from the committee. Anyone? We are adjourned.